Hi, this is Jennifer from Read It Again. Come join me while I read Part 3 of The Sunset Gates from the Unicorn Secret series by Kathleen Duey. Please consider subscribing, and if you enjoyed this book, hit the like button and share this video with all your friends. Binny welcomed Tibbs when Hart asked. She made him vow that he would keep the unicorn's secret. Tibbs looked solemn and sure when he promised. Hart didn't quite trust him. She wasn't sure if she ever would. But as the days passed, she decided Ruth Oakes had been right. Tibbs's father had been so mean. All the yelling and punishment had made Tibbs mean too. But Tibbs's apprenticeship had helped him. His master had been good to him, and the gypsies were kind to him too. Tibbs was polite now. He didn't tease anyone. He helped people. Amazingly, Kip liked him right off. Avamere didn't seem to mind him either. Moonsilver was shy, but he was that way around almost everyone. Tibbs kept his word about teaching her to read and write. He gave her lessons every night. He showed her how to write the alphabet. He taught her the sounds the letters made. They sat with their backs to the fire so the light would fall on Tibbs's papers. The gypsy children sat close, listening. Zim would move closer too. He already knew some of the sounds. Tibbs knew them all. Oh, hill, Hart said one evening. The word is hill. Good, Tibbs said. He smiled. He pointed at the next word he had written. Hart stared at it. The first two letters were the same as the last word. Hit. She said, hit. Tibbs grinned. Hart felt puffed up and proud like a strutting rooster. She laughed. I read 2 words. Tibbs pointed at the next word. By the end of the evening, she had sounded out many more. What town are you looking for? Hart asked Tibbs the next day as they walked along the narrow road. Zim was playing a lively tune on his flute. Several of the girls were singing. I'm not sure, he told her. I don't know the man's name. No one does. Some say it's just a tale. He looked into Hart's eyes and spoke quietly. I was born to work metal, Hart. He turned away. I know that sounds silly. Not to me, Hart told him. That night, Hart let Moonsilver out. He galloped over the rough, rocky ground. She looked up at the moon, listening to Moonsilver's swift, light hoofbeats, and thinking about her own life. She loved playing her flute, but not like Zim did. Music was the most important thing in his life. Ruth Oakes loved healing people, helping anyone sick or hurt. That was her purpose. Hart sighed. What was her purpose? She opened the caravan doors when Moonsilver was ready to sleep. Then she went to Binny's wagon and slid into her blankets. That night she dreamed about the moon-colored mountains again. In the dream, she was running uphill, leaping from one huge rock to the next. When she woke, the silver bracelet felt tight. She pushed it down onto her wrist and blinked in the gray dawn light. Kip whined outside the wagon. Hart rubbed her eyes. She sat up. Binny was still sound asleep. Hart pulled Lord Dunraven's book from her carry sack and opened it. Most of the words were not simple, like hill and hit and run and hop. But she couldn't read it. Not yet. Hart put the book away and climbed down out of the wagon. Kip jumped up. He ran in tight circles around her. He acted as though she had been gone a long time and he had missed her. That day and the next, the wagons wound along a narrow mountain road. There were rocks piled waist high along the road in some places. Every traveler picked up a few more and helped keep the road clear enough for wagons. The nights grew colder. The gypsy children huddled around the fire every night, chanting the letter sounds along with Hart. Tibbs's lessons got longer and longer. Binny bought big sheets of paper in town they passed through. Tibbs wrote words for the children to sound out. They learned to say the vowels. Hart led them, almost singing, A-E-I-O-U. Her breath hung in whispery clouds in the still cold air. One afternoon, the wagons rounded a long bend. "This is Thorin," Davy said, turning on the driver's bench. "There's a surprise in this town for you." He grinned and faced forward again. Hart looked around wide-eyed. Thorin? A town? But there was no town, just boulders as big as barns jutting up out of the ground. Then Hart noticed the stone walls that had been built between some of the boulders. The houses weren't square. They weren't round or any other regular shape. Each one was different. The doors were round, though. Each was painted a soft color that nearly matched the rock that surrounded it. Hart was sure that people had ridden through Thorin in the dusk of twilight many times and had not noticed it was there. "This town has more books than you'd ever seen," Davy said. Hart smiled at him. He was learning to read, too. They all were. "Where?" Hart called back, running a few steps to catch up. She grinned. Sure, he was teasing. Books were rare. "Just up there," he answered. Hart walked close to the driver's bench. "There," Davy said, pointing. Hart peered at one of the strange stone buildings. The wide doors were open. The slanting afternoon sun shone inside. Hart blinked. There were hundreds of books inside, stacked neatly on wooden shelves. Davy laughed. "You thought I was making it up, didn't you?" Hart nodded, still staring. As she watched, a woman came out of the building. She swung an iron gate open and Hart gasped. Davy turned to grin at her again. She glanced at him, then back at the gate. Beautiful figures were worked into the dark metal. 2 rearing unicorns with a setting sun between them. "Thank you," Hart said to Davy. He smiled. Hart knew he thought she was excited about the books, and she was. But she was astounded by the gates, and she couldn't explain. She had never shown Dunraven's book to anyone but Zim. Hart blew Davy a kiss, and he laughed. Then she whirled around and ran down the line of wagons. Kip followed at her heels, bounding along. When she found Tibbs, she pulled him to the side of the road. She pointed at the iron gates. A look of wonder came into his eyes. "Oh, I see. At first, the unicorns are right here, and the setting sun." Benny guided them straight through town as usual. They set up camp in a little meadow framed by huge boulders and tall pine trees. Hart's spirits lifted when she saw the trees. She turned in a slow circle, looking up the mountain slopes. They were dotted with trees halfway up, and the trees thickened into forest above that. Hart hummed as she did her work. Soon Moonsilver could be outside the wagon during the day. Hart cut grass for Moonsilver. "You'll have to be inside the wagon until we leave town," she told him. "But there are forests up ahead where the trees will hide you." He nuzzled her cheek, and she had to stretch up to hug him. Hart brushed Avamir's milky coat until it shone. Then she helped gather firewood. But while she worked, her pulse beat in rhythm to her thoughts. The gates had to mean something important. Who had made them? The man Tibbs was looking for? Hart shivered. Maybe he would know something about her family. The silver bracelet on her wrist seemed to tighten for an instant. Hart caught her breath. She set down the firewood she was carrying and slipped her shawl off her shoulders. Then she pushed up her sleeve to stare at the lacy silver threads. Would it tighten again? She waited. Nothing happened. She shook her head and picked up the load of firewood. "Are you finished?" Startled, Hart turned to see Tibbs. "Almost." "Benny says it's all right if we walk back into town," he said. "I told her we wanted to look at the books." Hart nodded. It was the truth. Just not the whole truth. "Benny said to be polite and kind," Tibbs said. Hart nodded. Benny always said that. "She says to be back before dark, too," Tibbs added. Hart set the firewood near the cook fire. Then she walked with Tibbs back up the road. They walked fast. It would soon be dark. "Look," Tibbs said, pointing. A woman was coming out of the stone building carrying a stack of books. She leaned to one side, trying to pull the gate closed. Hart saw the books slide and fall to the ground. She and Tibbs helped pick up the scattered books. Thank you," the woman said. "Will you please pull the gate shut for me?" Then she straightened. She looked at them more carefully. She frowned. "My name is Hart, and this is Tibbs," Hart said politely. "I'm learning to read. May I please go look at some of your books?" The woman glared at her. "These books are not just anyone to use," she said coldly. "They are here for Lord Ermedeath and his court." Tibbs cleared his throat. "May I ask you about the gates?" The woman's eyebrows arched upward. "The gates," she echoed. Tibbs nodded. "They show the ancient symbol of the royal house of Avamere," the woman said tersely. "They are very old." Hart blinked. The royal house of Avamere? That was her name, the name Ruth Oakes had given her. Hart Avamere. Ruth had gotten tired of Simon calling her girl. Hart had needed a name, so Ruth had given her one. Hart had never thought about where the name had come from. When the unicorn mare had needed a name, Ruth had suggested that Hart could share her own. So she did. Hart took a deep breath, trying to choose one question out of the dozens in her mind. Tibbs spoke before she could. "Ma'am," he gestured at the beautiful metalwork, "do you know who made them?" The woman narrowed her eyes. "Have you never heard of Joseph LeQuire?" Tibbs leaned toward her. "Is his forge near here?" The woman clicked her tongue and stepped back. "What business of it is yours?" She glared at them, then turned and walked away without looking back. Hart stood very still, her thoughts swirling like an uncertain wind. The slow clopping of hoofbeats made her look up. Coming through the twilight was a boy leading a big bay horse. It reminded her of the one she had seen outside Yolen's crossing. This one had armor as bright as lightning, blue, silver, and flawless. The metal covered its flanks and sides, its neck, even its head. There were tall plumes that nodded from its forehead. "What lord do you serve?" Tibbs asked politely as the boy passed. The boy looked startled. "This is young Ermedeath's mount. We came for new armor." He pointed up the mountainside to the north. "The forge is a long walk from here, but we can't rest yet. We must hurry onward tonight. The parade's next week, you know." "Parade?" Hart asked. "The old lord died last week." The boy spat in the dirt and glared at them the way the woman had. Hart saw his eyes stop on her shawl, then her gypsy belt. "Gypsies," he said it coldly, and then he walked on. Join me next time for part 4, the conclusion of The Sunset Gates.